Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are, of course, your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. We are here during one of the most calmest international breaks in Tottenham Hotspur's most recent history. What is going on? What is going on? What it's enabled us to do is bring on some fabulous, brilliant returning regular guests to Last Word on Spurs, and of course do some wonderful feature specials about all the things you need to know right now around the international break with what's going on. Back alongside me for this very special show. We normally see this man once every year or so, but this man's becoming more a regular feature. We joked off there, he's becoming a weekly segment on this show. We've got the brilliant Conor over at Levynomics back alongside me. Con, lovely to have you here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, Rick. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, of course, it's brilliant to be on with Kieran. So yeah, good to be on with both of you, and looking forward to jumping into it.
Absolutely. Now, look, generally during the international break, this is a time for a lot of these kind of gentlemen that we're going to bring on. That's trying to keep the wife happy, get away for a little period, because we do know right now, with football being football, it is utterly relentless. And with Tottenham, like I say, we're in a period right now of calmness, but it wasn't calmness towards mid-September, where I frankly was trying to pick up the phone to Kieran. He was away, and we said, look, don't worry, it's not going to change the news. It's still going to be there. And here we are a month later, and it's still rising its head even more so. And probably waiting a month has made it even more better. We've got the wonderful, he's simply everywhere these days. Been on with us the last 8 to 10 years on Last Word on Spurs. The superb Kieran Maguire is back. Kieran, lovely to have you here. How are you? I'll just get into the role play of how much you do these days, because there's just so much. How are you?
I'm great, Ricky. I'm really delighted to be back. As I say, we go back a long way. Before the internet was invented, practically. That's how it feels, doesn't it? Yeah, football finance was just a weird little thing 10 years ago, but today it is left, right, and centre of the game. There are celebrity football lawyers. We've got the likes of Stefan on TalkSport and annoyings Simon Jordan, who calls him Bagpuss. Such is the level of hostility there. So yeah, it's great fun. It is great fun. If I said I was keeping busy, that's a bit of an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we almost see you everywhere now, so we kind of know where you are and your daily whereabouts. That's the way the life has gone right now, which is simply crazy out there. Look, we'll just at the start of the show, Kieran runs a brilliant football finance-based podcast, Price of Football, which again, I think we've attracted our listeners and viewers to go over there. I think down the years with Tottenham, Kieran, I would like to say probably you've had a lot of Tottenham fans that have gone over there and most certainly kept with you, right? Because it's been an interesting time with Spurs financially down the years, that's for sure.
Yes, I mean they are sort of teacher's pet to a certain extent from a financial point of view. Yeah, being the most profitable club in the history of the Premier League, but yeah, as we've said on many an occasion, you don't get the open top bus tours for lowest wages to revenue percentages in football. So the paradox of being a successful business but a frustrating football club is something that you have to live with as Spurs fans day in, day out. Will we see a change in that going forwards? I guess that's one of the exciting things. That's one of the unknown unknowns. And that's what we love about football, the unpredictability of it. And you're doing well this season as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say it's been on that point, Con, bringing you in. There's a relative calmness right now about Spurs on the pitch, but is it fair to say off it? It's not really stopped, does it, really, in these last few months? If anything, it just feels like at the moment it's gaining even more traction right now. What's going on off the pitch and on it right now?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, I think I've said to you before, I set up my Twitter account back in April, I think it was, just after Tottenham released their financial statements, and it's been it's similar to sort of how Kieran described it. Just through the Tottenham lens, it's been pretty manic with things going on, and obviously you have the transfer window, and then with all the stuff with Levy, it certainly has felt that way. And as you say, I think the one benefit of Frank is he has brought a whole host of stability to the footballing side of things. So it's it feels like in some ways we spend more time talking about men in suits than we do men in football kits, right? But certainly at the moment, but hopefully that will start to change, and hopefully we'll start to see a bit more stability in the boardroom as we're starting to see on the pitch as well.
Absolutely. Just to give a bit of a rundown of what we're looking to cover during this show. I mean, look, it won't be news to anybody unless you've been under a rock for the last couple of months that Spurs have had a number of expressions of interest over buying the club, which have been in the, I don't lazical term, knocked back, if that's the right term for it. It appears at the moment that the Lewis family are in it for, can we describe it being the long haul? We shall see. I know for many Spurs fans out there, actions does speak louder than words. We'll get Kieran's take on where we are under the Lewis family and what the future may look like under their stewardship. Because again, they were here and have been here for the last 25 years, certainly when Daniel Levy has been at the club. But to be fair for Daniel, he was calling many of the shots under, of course, Joe Lewis, who we understand is no longer involved or could be involved, depending on who you speak to, who you want to believe in the game. And what does that mean for people like Peter Charrington, who, of course, is now in as the non-exec chairman at Spurs? You've got Min-hyeok running the day-to-day things at Tottenham in general. So, again, very intrigued to see how that does work. But it's fair to say it's been a crazy, chaotic time for Tottenham off the pitch, and which is why it makes this show even more fascinating to bring Kieran on at a time for many out there, Kieran. Maybe let's start with Daniel Levy because, you know, this was, for a lot of people out there, massive headline news. It still is really a month on the fact that, you know, when we talk about Tottenham, and I'm certain in your circles, Kieran, when Tottenham would come up as a subject, automatic would come alongside that would be the name Daniel Levy, right? I mean, that would always be the association with Spurs in regards to Daniel Levy, the role he's played. Obviously, for many out there, he would be seen as the man that has delivered the football club a world-class training ground, a world-class stadium. But I think for a lot of the fans out there, Daniel would be associated also with the failings of many high-profile transfers that never quite got over the line. So it'd be intriguing to know from you, what is your reaction nearly a month onto the news of Daniel Levy stepped down, stood down, no longer really operating on the footballing side of things? And if you believe what you do read, allegedly from The Athletic, I have to say that he actually is banned from entering the premises at Tottenham. A lot has happened, Kieran. Can you get your head around this?
I think step down isn't the case. There was definitely a lot more push than pull. I've got his salary details here over his period of involvement with Spurs. He earned £26.2 million, and that's before season 24-25, and that's before his payoff, and he will be paid off. In addition, he owns 29.9% of ENIC. So Spurs have been very good to Daniel. I know Spurs fans won't want to hear this necessarily. In my opinion, from a business point of view, I think he's been very good for Spurs as a business. I think the downside of Daniel Levy is that he was unable to walk away from things that the chairman shouldn't really be involved in. So, you know, he was practically putting the cones out, if you hear some of the stories. And being able to delegate, I think, was one of his skills that he failed in. Being willing to listen to other people was another one. But in terms of the financial legacy that he has left Spurs with a future-proof, multifunction, multi-sport stadium with some of the best training facilities on the planet, that's something which perhaps we should be assessing in 5 or 10 years' time, when you could be looking back. You'll be getting the cigars out and say, yeah, remember when we won this trophy in 28 and another one in 30 and another one in 32, and we owe Daniel Levy a huge debt of thanks for that, because without what he did on the business side, Spurs wouldn't be able to compete with the other members of the Big Six. Now, you know, as Spurs fans, that money might not have been spent particularly well. You know, I always say I'm not qualified to talk on the football side of things, but there's always two issues when it comes to investment on the footballing side of the game. A, how much money have you got to spend? Well, he's grown that, and he's grown that spectacularly. I think he deserves a lot of credit for. And B, how well has it been spent? I think Spurs and Manchester United would be the two clubs who have probably underperformed, have punched below their weight for many fans.
I mean, again, it's one of those things, isn't it, Con? Depending on who you speak to as a fan, Daniel's legacy. He said in that recent overlap interview that he thinks he'll get more of the credit down the line with regards to the stadium and the training ground. I mean, right now it does feel really fresh, doesn't it, in terms of his exit, that right now I suppose it's hard to really formulate a judgment other than one that we know a lot of fans out there for a long time campaigned for his removal. I'm just intrigued to know what you think, given the fact that I'll ask Kieran about this as well, when you're hearing suggestions that he isn't allowed back into the stadium, isn't allowed back into the premises, does it feel something quite serious has happened there for that stance to have been taken by the people that are now in control of the football club?
Yeah, I mean, if that's true, that's obviously absolutely implies something quite extreme has happened. And it's surprising to anyone to hear, and this is from someone who's very critical of Daniel Levy and ENIC. If all things are equal, I don't think Daniel Levy deserves to be banned from the stadium. So that absolutely implies something extreme has happened. I think Kieran's right. I mean, there is no doubt that, and it just depends where you sort of place who has benefited from that more, whether that's Tottenham or Daniel Levy and ENIC themselves, right? Because obviously, and where the interest was in making those things. Was the interest in the way that the business developed to benefit their own interests, i.e., because they knew that they could take it from a business that they acquired overall for about 90 million to which is now worth 3.5, 4 billion, or wherever we place it, versus really trying to build Tottenham up for future success, and that's where the debate probably comes, right? And I think for me, the way that I've always thought about it is certainly, yes, there's been some great work done in terms of building that financial side of the things, and as Kieran says, that's obviously given us the capacity now to achieve so much. Now, my issue with ENIC and Levy was always that you've created that, but you're not taking advantage of it, right? And so this sort of very risk-averse approach that they applied on things like wage to revenue ratio. I mean, you've only got to look at where Tottenham are over a number of periods, which are shown in this graph here, but also, even since the new stadium, it's definitely the case that transfer spend has grown, for example. But then when you look at Tottenham's, say, transfer amortization plus wages, we're still way behind the rest of the big six as well, right? And so there is certainly, ENIC's model over their period has definitely been to be too risk averse. Now, my conclusion from that is because they want to maximise their investment return. And so, they've been risk averse on that stuff in terms of wages and transfer spend. At the same time, when you look at owner financing, only the Glazers have been worse than them in terms of the amount of money that they've actually pumped into the football club. So, that's hard to grapple, I think, for Tottenham fans, because I think we all think, had you stretch yourself a little bit further, particularly under the Poch years, for example, when we went those free transfer windows without signing a single player, and we had net spend of, say, £13 million a year for 5 years before we moved into the stadium, at a time when Daniel told us that transfers wouldn't be impacted by the stadium. What could we have achieved, and how much further could revenues have grown? And there's that missed opportunity point, and there's opportunity cost associated with all of this stuff. And obviously we don't know where that might have gone had we spent more during that time. And as Kieran said, obviously the money that we do spend, historically we haven't spent that well either. So there's lots of moving parts to this, and I think what is exciting, and we were chatting a little bit about it behind the scenes, right, was if the Lewis family are actually true in their convictions, and I have a lot of cynicism and skepticism over this, because they've had, albeit it wasn't the kids, as we like to call them, it was Joe Lewis, but they have had 24, 25 years. And, I would argue that a lot of the blame should actually be at Joe Lewis rather than Daniel Levy, because of the fact that he was the one who was controlling the purse strings. He was the one who had money to pump in if he wanted to, and decided not to, generally. That being said, if we do believe them as their word now, I think we now know that we do have that huge PSR and UEFA squad cost headroom. And this is a football club that could really fly if you had the ambition that matched the off the pitch finances.
It's just intriguing, go back to that point, Kieran, that what the suggestions are right now. And again, this was according to The Athletic, that, for a man that really to some degree had total control at Spurs and really Daniel Levy had the final word always, to be at a point where when he left the club on September 4th, he wasn't even allowed into the training ground to retrieve his possessions, nor was his wife Tracy, who worked at the club until the day Daniel was sacked. Their belongings were eventually returned by a van. I have to ask you, I mean, you've been around football finance for a very, very long time. I don't want to age you too much, but to have such an abrupt exit like that, does that insinuate something quite serious has happened behind the scenes for it to be of that nature, of that departure?
I think, as Conor was alluding to, there's been a breakdown. If you are looking to employ somebody, and also, I always say to football fans, I say to you two guys, you are employing the Lewis Family Trust, you are employing ENIC, you are employing Daniel to run the club on your behalf. And it comes down to three things. Do I like you? Do I trust you? Can you do the job? Now, since clearly his dismissal was being planned for some time before they finally let him go or pushed him out, I think that trust relationship had gone. And I think that reveals two things. First of all, there wasn't a good relationship. And secondly, these people have been working together for years and years and years. And if you feel, if I felt, if my boss turfs me out, and people get made redundant all the time, it's a sad feature of modern life. If there is so little trust in you and you are that high a position, it does perhaps indicate that Spurs were not operating well. Because sometimes you say, look, I think you need to go, and the person involved acknowledges that, and we all move on, and you send your farewells. This is clearly not the case with regards to Daniel, and I do think he is a stony-faced man. Let's face it, he's not known for smiling. He's not known for being emotional. But if he wasn't distraught, I would be amazed, because he is still Spurs through and through in terms of his love for the club. And you can dislike his decisions, and you can certainly say that there has been a lack of ambition at times from a fan's point of view. I absolutely get that, but nobody would deny. He's not like John Henry. He's not like the Glazers. He's not like Stan Kroenke and Abramovich. He was Spurs first, and then he was Spurs chairman at a later date, as opposed to the other way around. So it doesn't look good. I do bits and pieces with The Athletic on a fairly regular basis, and my understanding is they do not put stories out unless they are absolutely certain, because it's their reputation. Remember, they've got the New York Times behind them. New York Times doesn't want to suffer reputational damage. So they must be very confident in the stories that they have published. And I think that's why it's taken so many people by shock and also shame. You can want Daniel Levy to go. Everybody's entitled to opinion. I don't think many Spurs fans would have liked him to have gone under such circumstances. It's a bit Wall Street like, when you saw those pictures, 15, 18 years ago, when all the banks were closing down and people were said, leave now, take a cardboard box, or you can take one thing with you, one memento, and out on your ear. I think that's a shame for somebody who loves the club.
Yeah, it's one of those. On that point you mentioned it, Kieran. I mean, look, me and you, Con, we've been around the block when it comes to Spurs, so we'll remember how a lot of managers have left in very difficult circumstances. Also, not had the chance to say goodbye. I think to the likes of Pochettino, you had Martin Jol sacked at half time, which sums up Tottenham as a club at that point, really, when you're doing that kind of behaviour. There's been obviously a number of managers that would have felt they've not had the right level, maybe, of trust, the right level of treatment. So again, many would say out there, well, you kind of reap what you sow.
Yep.
I mean, what I would say with Daniel Levy is that, look, I don't know Daniel Levy personally. I don't have anything personal against Daniel. I mean, I've always felt, for me, that whilst I never felt under Daniel we were in any financial concern, I always felt we were financially safe under him. I think it would also be fair to say that I also never felt under Daniel we were going to win the Premier League, right? I just didn't feel Tottenham as a club were ever going to get to that point. So what it does bring, obviously, is quite an exciting maybe change for fans out there. And I suppose we'll ask Kieran about this. It's also what now happens kind of to the percentage of the club that he still owns and how amicable that's going to be in terms of if he's up for selling it, if it will go to a minority stakeholder. I mean, do you see that kind of being an issue when it comes to then the conversations around that, if this is the relationship it's become right now, or is business, and you can separate those two things?
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard the news that he stepped down, and this has been I've mentioned it a couple of times on this show, right? My theory was always that they would look to sell his share, and I think for two reasons. One, because I think I got the sense that perhaps the Lewis family, in a way that Joe Lewis perhaps had a different view, were not necessarily happy to front cash anymore. And on Levy's behalf, and I think we all know that obviously Levy's a very wealthy man, but he's not football club owner cash rich, right? And so what his wealth is wrapped up in Tottenham. So to the extent that they were to look to pump money in the future, Daniel wouldn't have been able to have met the sort of commitments that we know of the sort of type of money that needs to be pumped in. And that's not just on the footballing side of things. Obviously, finishing in the hotel and the residential buildings and all of this type of stuff is going to require serious cash. So I think there was definitely, probably a sort of area of frustration on that piece. I sort of thought it's odd for him to be stepped down in such a way if it was completely amicable, or there wasn't a sort of complete agreement that he was going to go completely, in that he was sort of taken away from his executive role, so he loses that £3 million salary each year, but he's not even given a sort of space on the board, right? So he's not even made a non-executive director who still gets to represent his interests as a sort of fairly significant minority shareholder. So he's completely removed from Tottenham, right? So for me, it felt like there must be some sort of agreement that there is an exit plan for him. Now, obviously, some people speculated that would be an exit plan for ENIC in its totality, but obviously, with refusing these latest expressions of interest and the fact that the Lewis family at least seem to be committed for the short to medium term, I can absolutely see a world where they look to sell Levy's stake or get Levy to sell his stake, and whether that's tied to, it's not easy to force that. But
Yep.
that being said, there may be something, as I said on the show on Monday, there may be something in the sort of agreement at the ENIC level in the Bahamas that if you can't front cash, for example, then we can force you to sell in that circumstance because you're not meeting and that's quite common in the private equity world, for example, right? So, that's potential, I think, and if this disagreement is that bad that, for example, the club were in a situation where maybe they were going to take legal action against Levy because he's done something that wrong and it's that toxic, again, that adds another thing into the mix. So I think they will. Now, I think there's another challenge, though, with finding a minority shareholder. And as I said, we saw this with John Textor at Crystal Palace. People don't really want to be minority shareholders being told what to, pumping a huge amount of money in and being told what to do by someone else, right? And I know Jim Ratcliffe has obviously done that at United, but the difference is one, Jim Ratcliffe is effectively making the decisions as a minority shareholder. The Glazers have sort of taken themselves away from decision making. And secondly, I suspect that he will look to buy Man United over time, and it's a phased takeover probably. So if the Lewises are not going to look to sell in the short to medium term, who is going to be comfortable coming in as that minority shareholder, perhaps, and without that promise of a phased takeover, I'm not so sure. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I might be putting two and two together and getting four. Amanda Staveley's been a regular, frequent visitor to Tottenham over the last year and a half, 2 years. She was there again previous weekend to last when Spurs hosted an NFL match, and it's an interesting, really, theory in regards to Amanda, because she's obviously been one of these entities that I'm going to come on to that obviously is unequivocally stated they're not going to be bidding for the club, and they've now removed their interest to some degree. Kieran, just quickly on Levy before we do look to move on, what do you think that future does hold in terms of his piece in the pie? Do you share Conor's maybe feeling that at some point that will be bought out? I mean, or how hard would that be now, given the fact that it does feel like we've said there potentially, allegedly, there's a breakdown in that relationship? How do you see that potentially working out?
I think it all comes down to price.
Okay.
Daniel Levy doesn't need to sell his shares because he has been well paid, well remunerated by the board, who presumably must be happy, and the ENIC themselves must have been happy with his contribution. So he doesn't need to sell the shares physically. He's got those monies generated over the years. So therefore, it comes down to a value issue. Now he might decide to be awkward because he's feeling aggrieved following the method of his disposal, or he might decide not to sell the shares because he believes that there is still an awful lot of value growth opportunity at Spurs, and therefore to sell now is potentially to sell cheap, and therefore he wouldn't be extracting maximum value. So those are the reasons why we might have the status quo. The opposite side, he might say, forget this for a game of soldiers. I've done my bit. I think I've put in a quarter of a century. They don't want me. I'm going to throw my toys out of the pram, provided somebody comes along. I suspect, and I've not looked at the resolutions and the articles of association in enough detail. I suspect that there could be a buyout price or from ENIC or from the Joe Lewis family itself, who might have first refusal if somebody comes along, or that they might be perfectly happy to have somebody else owning a proportion of ENIC, because they've still got control on a day-to-day basis.
Gut feeling, Kim, if we go for our first break, in a year's time, do you think Daniel Levy has still got a portion of the pie of Tottenham?
My gut reaction is that he will still be there, yes.
Okay.
Because they've rejected the offers to date.
Right.
The fact that they've not engaged any further with the people making the offers suggests to me that they want some time out to think.
Okay, well, look, let's go to that subject next. We are going to squeeze in our first break of the show here for our listeners that are on audio. We have got nearly over 4,500 of you that are watching us live across all of our platforms. As always, thank you ever so much for your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs during what is at the moment a calm, relaxed international break, and it doesn't really happen often in Spurs world. We are normally bringing Kieran on here and Conor, to be fair, at points of crisis levels. Kieran has had to come here on a number of occasions and soothe the audience, even though he's not a Tottenham fan, and try to keep us going. But listen, we're delighted to have Conor alongside us, Kieran alongside us here, long-time friend of the show. Please make sure you are listening to and checking out that wonderful podcast, Price of course, Football, which is a regular, it feels, on the beat now when it comes to the podcast out there in the sporting world. It's, again, telling of the times, isn't it, Kieran, that, the financial world of football. I mean, I won't tell us what your diary looks like, because I don't want to give your wife a fright if she's in the background listening to you. But are you busier than ever? Because it feels like that.
Yes, I am. I did a documentary in London on Monday night. I was on TalkSport last night until 10 to midnight. I've done 4 radio stations today. I'm with you guys, and I absolutely love having a chat, because I feel like I'm at home. I'm feeling it's like putting on my slippers, getting into a nice comfy chair, having a chat with Ricky and the boys. It's always a pleasure. But it is an issue which certainly is expanding in interest. When I started my podcast, which was 6 years ago, that was sort of somebody persuading me to do it. And I said to myself, it will last 4 episodes. Nobody will listen. We'll run out of stories to talk about, and it'll be a bit like the worst of one night stands from 20 years ago, which I've tried to erase from my memory. But I got it very, very wrong.
Absolutely. Now you're more busy than ever. God help the lovely wife. Right. Everyone out there, keep liking, keep subscribing to the show. We touched on it there before we went for that first break, that, as Kieran has mentioned, that today ENIC are rejecting offers for the football club. Obviously, one of the more recent of those came from quite an interesting chap from the US that was fronting a consortium that we had the wonderful Martin Lipton on Monday. Obviously, long-time friend of the show, someone that obviously broke that exclusive story. And to be honest with you, as quick as it came, it also went. Tottenham making their feelings clear at the moment. That's certainly ENIC, that the club is not for sale. And, it's not been only the first that we've seen of recent expressions for the club. We've had the likes of, obviously, PCP. That, again, was a consortium, PCP International Finance, led by Amanda Stavely. You had the other couple of consortiums led by Dr. Roger Kennedy and Wing Fei Ng through Firecourt Holdings Limited. I mean, just on that point, Kieran, is it bizarre that in the last 25 years, we've heard really utter radio silence on any interest in buying Tottenham? And then suddenly, as Daniel Levy is announced to have been stood down, pushed down, stepped down, this last 6 weeks, all we've heard is expressions of interest from other parties. I mean, how comes that's come now? And where has that expressions of interest been in the last 25 years?
Well, there have been people interested. I think the feeling was that with Daniel at the helm and Daniel being this micromanager, and certainly the stories that were doing the rounds, and I'm sure Conor will be familiar with this just as much as I am, the stories were that, yeah, there might be people interested in Spurs, but Daniel didn't want to give up his role as chairman, and therefore somebody new coming into Spurs, how are they going to put their stamp on the club, given that he won't want to relinquish any form of control? What we didn't realise was that clearly there was a move behind the scenes to effectively to sideline Daniel, to bring in new people to a series of positions where they could step up, as we've seen. And therefore, in the last 6 weeks, people go, well, yeah, I would have been interested in Spurs 5 years ago. There's clearly a change. Let's just test the water. What are the Lewis family aims? And they have all been rebuffed. I think you have to take some of them with a pinch of salt, because I've seen enough bids from fantasists, tire kickers, and frankly lunatics at many a club over the years. And people do it because they just want the attention. Because we're talking about Spurs as if it's a big business being valued at £3.5 to £4 billion. You could get 12 Spurs for what Electronic Arts has just been sold for. That sort of gives an indication of global value. Microsoft acquired Activision. That was probably about 15 to 20 times the value of Spurs at present. So football is actually a small industry which gets a huge amounts of attention from a business point of view. And therefore, if I wanted to become famous, I'll bid for a football club. Has anybody heard of Sheikh Jassim for the last 3 years? There's one photograph of this bloke on the internet, this supposed Qatari guy that was going to buy Manchester United. Since then, not a murmur. There's been nothing seen or heard of him. I think I would love to have that in a digital world, to have no digital presence apart from one photograph. That's really bizarre. There was another interested party in Manchester United. I think he was a Finnish DJ. And he said, oh, yeah, I'm interested in buying Manchester United. And people go, well, we've looked at your accounts. You've got no money, pal. But he went from having 3,000 Twitter followers to 300,000 Twitter followers in the space of 48 hours. So football gives you attention. So trying to work out the runners and riders here is always difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite, maybe there's a thing with DJs at the moment, right? I mean, this is maybe what it's a thing with DJs. Keep your eye on the DJs out there. I mean, I think the one that obviously we've seen recently, Con, being rejected in regards to Brooklyn ENIC, is just how public this, well, I say takeover, but how public his interest was, to the point where he was almost daily updating us behind the scenes on his social media as to the moves he was taking to try and entice, or dare I say, purchase the football club.
Yeah, which is very tech bro, crypto bro type behaviour, isn't it? And it reminded me a little bit of Daniel Ecker, who tried to buy Arsenal, the Spotify guy, because he was quite public with it. And I think obviously the thinking is you try and rally the fans to get behind you, but to me, I don't know, when you're buying a business that is, say, worth or trying to buy a business that's worth 3 to 4 billion, doesn't necessarily feel the right way to conduct yourself, does it? Professionally, that you're plastering stuff over Instagram and Twitter and everything else, right? So yeah, I don't know how serious it was. I mean, by all accounts, it was serious enough that he at least had a tour, but we don't know who else toured the stadium, the training ground, etc. And also, it was serious enough at least that the takeover panel felt like it was worthy of a disclosure. But yeah, I mean, the story is that one of the consortium pulled out pretty quickly, who was Dan Gilbert, which is the Cleveland Cavaliers guy, right? And he was one of the ones potentially backing the money, but who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what will go quite now, back to your original question as to why do we think there's so much takeover talk at the moment, and obviously because the only other sort of real big example I can think of, which at least got to sort of a stage where it wasn't just newspaper talk, was Kane Hoy tried to buy Tottenham back in something like 2012, something like that.
Yep.
It was around that time. But yeah, I think it's just sharks circling, right? Because of Levy going. I think it's just that sort of feels like a timely, with all of the change, it feels timely.
Again, on this point, at the moment, from what we're hearing and seeing and reading, Kieran, the message is ENIC don't want to sell Tottenham. But as you know, being around football finance for many, many years, when does anyone advertise they are for sale, right? I mean, again, I just wonder from your perspective, what kind of lens are you looking at through this? Do you genuinely believe that the Lewis family are here for, I mean, I don't know, can you even use that word or description as the long haul in football? I don't know if you can even use that description as the long haul. What do you feel and see in here, given the fact that, these recent expressions of interest have not gone any further than simply expressions of interest to date, and they've rejected all bids to date?
I think if I was the Lewis family, I would be absolutely delighted with what's happened, because it's put Spurs in the shop window without formally putting it in the shop window. The fact that we've got 3 sets of people that have been interested, they're not interested in selling at this price. And and Conor's got experience of business. I've got experience of business. Everything is available for a price. There is no business that won't be sold, provided the terms are correct. I think this can only help the Lewis family in terms of, they are currently being seen as custodians and protectors of the club, but in 2 or 3 years' time, if football continues to grow, they could be looking at an extra 20 or 30% return, and they can afford to sit it out. Again, they don't need to sell, and that's always a strong negotiating position. If I'm trying to sell my house, or if I'm not interested in selling my house, but people keep coming up and knocking on the front door and saying, "Tell you what, I'll offer you this," and I say, "No, I'm quite happy. Can't be asked moving," and so on. And then they come back and say, "What? How about this?" And then you go, "Oh, well, let me just think about it." So never say never, because that's how business works.
Your gut feeling, I mean, I don't, Conor, you can come into this as well. We talk about that word ambition, don't we? And again, I know, Kieran, your focus will obviously be off the pitch rather than on it. I mean, the key thing's going to be, as we know, Conor, it's going to be actions rather than words, right? I mean, they can suggest that from their perspective that they want to see the club win more, be more successful, but there have to be actions behind that that's going to reassure fans that that is the case, because we can't get away from it. They have been here for as long as Daniel Levy has been here, and they allowed Daniel to call the shots, rightly or wrongly, for the last quarter of a century. So whilst they've maybe to some degree removed the noise with Daniel Levy going, the people that employed Daniel are still here at the football club and are custodians of the football club, like Kieran just said.
Yeah, and I think, look, it may be the realization that, and we spoke about this a little bit on Monday, Rick, that we've grown revenues almost in spite of some of our on-pitch performance type stuff, which is almost at odds with the way that a lot of other football clubs are able to grow revenue, which is sort of linked to how successful they are on the pitch, right? So you look at what Man City have done in terms of their revenues, and without getting into anything in terms of dodgy sponsorships and that type of thing, but a lot of their why are they able to get such a huge deal with Puma as their kit sponsor, say, which is obviously not linked to the Middle East? it's because they've been successful on the pitch, right? And so, you know, I think that we are at that stage now where we've almost built our revenue as big as we can get it, without having consistent Champions League football, and therefore, you know, when you start to be in the Champions League consistently and you're consistently competing for honours and hopefully winning honours, you then will get bigger commercial deals and then you grow your revenue that way. So, you know, it was one of the criticisms I always threw at Daniel Levy and ENIC, that they was never willing to throw a scrap to catch a mackerel, right? Speculate to accumulate. And so, you know, had they been a little bit more, less risk averse before, you know, who's to say where revenue may be been able to grow to? And so perhaps they've had a realization around that. And, you know, for them, in terms of if you're saying the business is worth 3.5 billion right now, to me, it's a pretty easy business to get to 5 billion if you're able to get that success right and grow revenue accordingly. And so, you know, I think Sam has raised the point in the comments, right? And Sam and I have spoken about this a little bit offline, you know, around is another way that they try to get capital by doing a secondary equity raise, for example, you know, which therefore still gets them the benefit of being able to have majority control. But they get some capital in to help fund that player side of things, plus also, you know, what, as I was saying earlier, what we know is still to be spent on property. So we know that is probably what they're thinking. I know Sam also has a theory that, you know, and you know, I think there is definitely some legs in this, that, you know, the Lewis family might decide to keep this business for a long time, right? Because they're not a traditional private equity company, right? They don't have institutional investors in the same way that a typical private equity company has, where they're looking to realize a return. This is almost more like a family office style business, and they're just managing their family's wealth. And so it might be that they look to pass this through the generations, for a number of years. So because they don't need to realize liquidity. So I know that's the news that no Tottenham fan probably wants to hear, based on the way the Lewis family have acted over the last 25 years, but it's certainly plausible. So yeah, the proof will absolutely be in the pudding, though, won't it? I think we will see what happens, you know, in terms of any sort of capital raise, through the sort of Companies House disclosures that will come in due course, particularly where they increase that. And me and Kieran, being the nerds that we are, will be actively looking out for those. But we'll also see it in terms of the way they act in January and then in the summer. And January is a difficult window, but I think most fans are probably willing to give this new era the next 2 windows to see how they act, I would guess, before they pass more judgment.
I asked you, Kieran, your gauge on Daniel Levy's portion of the pie with regards to what we're being billed or is viewed as the new era of Tottenham under the Lewis family. The same people that, again, they're not kids, are they? I mean, these guys, with due respect, you know, these are people that are in there, I think they're in their 60s now, right? So they have been around Spurs for quite a long time. And the floating of the idea that what happened in Bilbao for the club in the summer to win the Europa League has got their intrigue, and now suddenly they're really invested. How much do you buy that as someone that studies the financial scales of football? I mean, can you really look at this and think in 18, 24 months' time, do you see them keeping hold of this, or do you think if the right price comes in for them, they will sell?
Well, as you say, they are in their 60s. At the same time, they're all multi-millionaires in their own right. So yeah. If you give them each, you know, £500 million, what are they going to do with that money? Yeah, there's only so many yachts you can sail on. There's only so many islands you can sail to. And they already have the resources to do that. So I would imagine that for some of them, it could be a case of, I want a legacy. I want to be seen as the person that changed Spurs from Daniel Levy's Spurs to a daring Spurs, to an exciting Spurs, and so on. And the soft reasons, the kudos reasons, the power, the influence reasons would be therefore driving their decisions. So that could keep them at the club. they're Spurs fans from what I hear. You know these things far closer than I do, but their dad was Joe Lewis was a Spurs fan. I appreciate the attitude of the club is, oh, was Joe Lewis? Never heard of him because of various misdemeanors.
Yeah.
But and Conor will confirm this as well. The money is being spent. 7 years out of the last 8, they spent more than £100 million in the transfer, in the annual transfer spend, and then it comes down to what have you got for that? You look at your squad and you go, well, which one of these has increased in value? Again, you're that much closer to things than I am. I do similar on the Manchester United podcast, and the conclusion is that since 2013 they've signed one good player in Bruno Fernandes, who's delivered and whose market value has always been maintained. I think there's a footballing question to answer in terms of why are you not getting these decisions right? Again, I look at my numbers here, and these are my calculations. They're not accurate, but they're sort of got a rough feel. The average weekly wage: Manchester City 175 grand a week, Liverpool 164 grand a week, Manchester United 155, Chelsea 143, Arsenal 139, Spurs 94. There is still a gap. Now, if you've got the 6th highest budget to invest in wages year in, year out, and we say we're just having a general chat, and we weren't talking about Spurs. Like, if I came to you and Ricky said, hey, Ricky, so where do you think the club with the constant 6th highest wage bill in the Premier League would finish? What would your answer be to me?
Well, you probably think they'd finish 6th.
And where is Spurs averaged?
5th and 6th, haven't they? I mean, it's been between that. Yeah.
So you've punched at your weight on the pitch. The frustration is, if I reconfigured that question, where would you expect the club that charges the highest average ticket prices in the country to finish? You would 6, no, and that's, I think, the paradox of Spurs. That the investment is 6, but your investment is top 2.
Go on, come in at that point. I can see you can come in there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, there is of course some context as to why we charge the most, and we all make that active decision, I suppose, to pay that, and some of that is based on being in London and having a fantastic stadium to go and watch the team, right? And so there's a bit of a premium for that compared to, say, perhaps some of the northern grounds where cost of living is different, etc., etc. But for sure, I think that's the way that fans definitely think of it. Is look at what we're paying. I mean, the other way to say it is Daniel Levy felt that he should be paid as the highest. He didn't take that same approach when it came to wages for footballers, right? If you look at particularly in years where he got bonuses, I mean, he was far and above the next highest. And this is also, and the reason why I always had a issue with that is because he wasn't only a CEO either, right? De facto CEO. He was a part owner. And so to pay yourself like that as a part owner when you already know you're going to make, bearing in mind, he probably has actually put in very, very little cash of his own, if at all, because as I said before, it was probably Lewis that did that on his behalf. He's going to walk away with 900 million, £1 billion one day. So to then take the decision to pay himself the most as well irks fans for sure. I think for me, when I think about what do I want my owners to be, if we're talking about like the future of Tottenham, I don't necessarily expect Tottenham to win a trophy every year, and I don't expect us, because we are in the Premier League. It's really tough. You're competing against huge clubs who have owners with ambition. But what I want to feel like is that I feel like my owners have done everything within their power to compete on the football pitch. And I don't think anyone can come away from the Levy era, the ENIC era, and feel like they've given their utmost to compete on the football pitch. Have they stretched themselves to the very limits of what they could afford on wages to revenue? Why did they decide to take £500 million out of the club in the last 10 years and spend that on infrastructure? from a cash perspective, and then tell us on the same side, well, it won't impact transfers. All of these things are slightly at odds, right? And so, for me, it's not about some fans. It will be about 2 trophies or whatever it was in 24
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
For me, it's about we have not put ourselves in the position to feel like we can compete for those trophies year in, year out. And so hopefully that's something we'll see change.
I know we're conscious of time. We need to go for our final break. Before we do, Kieran, I asked this about Daniel, and I asked you about the Lewis family. Your gut feeling around it, being around football for a very, very long time, studying a lot of different ownership models out there. This is a bit of a unique one, isn't it? Because we're in a situation where the same people have been around the club for 25 years, yet it's being briefed as the new era. I mean, that just doesn't happen at a lot of clubs. So what's your gut feeling on that? Will it be, for some out there, what we see is going to happen over the next couple of windows? Is that where you'll make your judgment? Or do you think the chance in their arm, they're going to look to try and drive up that valuation and get out at probably what might be, we're hearing, I think Conor said crazy valuations out there. I think it was valued recently at 3.5 billion. Could they get 5 billion for it? I mean, does it just come down to the magic number? What do you think, Kieran, in terms of their investment in Tottenham? I say the long term, they've been here 25 years. So what's your gauge on that?
They've been 25 years, but they've delegated it to Daniel.
Yes.
Now, so as far as they're concerned, this is a new broom. This is a new culture. And I think they want to give it a go, is my gut reaction. Whether they get 3.5 billion or 5 billion isn't going to make a blind. Yeah, if I'm in my mid 60s, if I've got 3.5 billion pounds to spend, let's face it, half of it's going to go on hookers and cocaine, and the rest of it I'm going to waste. and I can do that whether or not I get that extra 1.5 billion. So I think they want to have a go and see where they are in perhaps 2 or 3 years' time, and if it hasn't worked out, then perhaps they might invite people back.
But do you think having a go, does that mean, as in when we're using that term, having a go, does that mean in the same way the fans are being charged, I think like we've said there, the second highest ticket prices, even in Europe or around the world, would it be that same level of, I'd say, competition they're showing on that aspect, actually on the pitch rather than off it? I suppose that's what a lot of fans might be intrigued to know. Is that what's going to come down to, really, maybe, to see that? Because like you said, you read it out earlier, the difference in the wages, compared to those other clubs that you've mentioned, it's scary. It's scary how far the drop-off is when you consider what Tottenham are paying to what the other big boys, as you read out, are paying to their set of players.
That's right. And it's now an opportunity. First of all, we do have the new kids. Okay, they're new kids, but they're not young kids in town. Secondly, there is participation in the Champions League. I think the impact of what happened in Bilbao, and let's be honest, not the greatest game of football, but it was all. There has never been a match, in my observation, where the quality of the football was being so irrelevant. It was all about the result, because that was seismic for both parties involved. And I think the owners said, right, well, this is going to give us an extra £50 million minimum. If Spurs make progress in the competition, we could be doubling or trebling that. Let's have some change. Let's not just go back to being, oh, right, this is an opportunity to get our wages to revenue ratio down a bit further in 25, 26. Let's try to change things. And if we can get into the Champions League again and get into that virtuous cycle, there are so many positives surrounding Spurs. The 30 non-footballing events which are taking place now each year due to the agreement with the council. The fact that anybody that is interested in buying knows that they don't have to go and put money into the infrastructure because it's already been spent. I mean, one of the reasons why I was talking to somebody who was connected actually with one of the lenders to Spurs.
Okay. And
they are desperate for Spurs to be sold. And the reason why the banks want Spurs to be sold is because they lent money in 2015, 2016 too cheap. And the way that will work is the new owners come in, they say, well, you're not the Lewis family. We're not going to lend to you at 2.5%. We're going to charge you. So we got all of these different little stakeholders with slightly different objectives. But my gut reaction is that the Lewis family want to give it 2 or 3 years. They've got an opportunity this season, and I think winning that much in Bilbao was a catalyst to the change that we saw with the removal of Daniel, because this is a once in a generation opportunity to change the culture with the benefit of additional revenues coming in.
Okay, look, we are pressing against time. We are going to go for our final break of the show for our listeners and audio. I am very conscious that we've got over 5,500 that are watching us live. I know there's a few people that want to get some questions in. Look, we'll open the floor to those that are watching the show live. If you want to throw some questions in, we'll see how we are time-wise, and we can ask some of these to Kieran at the end. Let's ask this one here. This is from Rich S. Man, and we'll get Conor maybe take this one here. He says, Conor, before we go for this final break, could it be the Lewis family not for sale long-term generations of ownership is a strong arm tactic in some way for Levy who wants to cash out? Let's let you tell that very quickly, Con, before we go for this final break.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I've been pretty consistent. I don't see why Levy would. There is the point, I suppose, that he potentially wants to benefit from that further upside as well. But I can't see how it's in anyone's interest now for him to stay with a slice of ownership, to be honest. It's, he doesn't have any say, can't. Yeah, he doesn't even have representation on the board now. If it's not amicable, it makes sense for everyone to cut. It would be my sense of that, but obviously that's not necessarily the easiest thing practically. But certainly, my prediction is that will happen, and it might be the case that it's not a new minority shareholder, but actually the Lewis family take that bit and become bigger owners. But we'll see. We'll see how that plays out.
I know, Tony, the question in the comments very quickly. We do need to squeeze in this last break. We're going to stay online for another 10 minutes or so. Kieran, very quickly on this stadium naming rights, do you expect that to change, accelerate, be any different under the Lewis family? What's your gauge on that for you very quickly? Do you expect any change on the stadium naming rights from your perspective?
The story that kept coming back to me was that people got to the line but never got over the line, and the reason why they didn't get over the line had the initials D and L attached to it. So I think there is a chance with a change of captaincy at the helm of the club to potentially get that. Is that going to hugely change Spurs' finances? No, but it's a long-term deal. You should be looking for £20 million a year. That pays the salaries of 2 decent players, or 3 decent players. So I think it's back in play to an awful lot of people felt that they'd wasted an awful lot of time trying to get naming rights sorted, and there was a reason why it didn't get sorted. And again, it comes down to somebody micromanaging, trying to extract more and more. When you're negotiating, you want both parties to go away feeling that they've done well out of it, and that was never Daniel's strategy. He always had to get one over.
Fascinating. Look, we're going to squeeze in that final break of the show for our listeners audio. Thank you as always to the nearly 6,500 that are watching us live on all our platforms. Again, thanks again for all that support for Last One and Spurs. It is now becoming your final chance very quickly to vote for Last One and Spurs in the upcoming Football Content Awards for 2025. You can help us bring another trophy to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We are up for the nomination of Best Podcast in the Premier League and Best in Social Creators. You can vote for us by hitting or going to the QR code with your phone. For those that want to vote for us online, you can also find those details in our episode descriptions for our listeners on audio. In this final piece of the show, we'll be touching on a couple of things in relation to PSR, Kieran's favourite subject, probably Conor's too. And also what the future does hold for Tottenham is an exciting future we'll see as well. A lot of talk around the regulator. We've got to get Kieran's quick thoughts on that as well. But we're getting asked a few questions around Kieran's podcast. Price of football, of course, you can find Kieran on that. Very busy man. So like I say, please make sure you go and give that a listen on your commute. It does feel like, Kieran, that is always a busy show, right? It's only becoming busier as it's gone on. It's never it's not reduced in terms of frequency or volume of content, because it's just the world we live in now where it's ongoing. And dare I say the words to you, Sheffield Wednesday don't collapse too much, because that seems like a story in itself, which luckily on Last One Spurs we don't have to cover.
Yeah, I think Sheffield Wednesday is being cited by my wife as a potential divorce grounds.
Fantastic. Look, let's come into this final part. Again, we'll employ everyone in there. If they've got any questions for Kieran, we'll try and do some quick fire ones towards the end of the show. So keep, if you can, get them in the comments. We'll see what we can do. Let's come on to that point if we can, Kieran. PSR, right? That sends shivers down certain supporters, owners, chairmen, managers' minds. Where do you see that maybe having a direct impact in this upcoming January transfer window? Maybe does that link in also to this regulator coming into football as well? Is there a kind of two-piece there to it? Do you want to give us an outline from your perspective as to how that might change the game in what will be 2026?
Well, there is another meeting of Premier League executives in about 3 weeks. There was a discussion in the most recent meeting as to whether we should move away from the current set of rules, which allow clubs to lose £105 million over 3 years, to something more in line with the UEFA rules, which say that you can spend, I'll keep it this very simple, 70% of what you bring in you can spend on wages. It's actually a bit more finesse than that, and there's myself and Conor, we go into spreadsheet heaven when we go through the actual rules. But Spurs are in a very strong position there. They've got absolutely nothing to worry about. The other thing, that there's actually two sets of financial rules in UEFA. You can lose £60 million over 3 years. Spurs, again, strong position there, nothing to worry about. The problem with the rules is that some clubs feel that they're on the wrong side of history. Would Chelsea have been a successful football club? Would Manchester City have been a successful football club if the rules introduced in 2013 had been introduced at 10 years earlier? And the simple answer is no. They wouldn't have been able to make those signings. They wouldn't have managed that investment. They wouldn't have had those trophies. You can therefore understand why Newcastle, Villa, the new owners at Everton, Marinakis at Forest perhaps as well, they feel very, very aggrieved that they've arrived as owners too late. Is there any willingness of the big six clubs, and include Spurs, and I think it's another club in North London? I can't remember. Barnet, is it right?
Not on this show. Yeah.
No, they don't want competition, because 6 into 4 doesn't go when it comes to Champions League places. And I was saying, before the break, it's worth somewhere between 50 to 150 million pounds a year. If you miss out, if you're not on that 6 into 4 or 6 into 5, if we've got more places available, there's a problem. If that 6 becomes a 7, an 8, or a 9, we've got a problem.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Conor, on that point for you with regards to how that's going to maybe change the financial landscape, as Kieran outlines there, this regulator coming in, and what does that mean for Spurs fans? Should it worry us at all? Kieran saying there we're on the right side of a lot of these factors to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, the ironic thing for Tottenham is that we get thrown into this same narrative around Big Six cartel and, the frustrations, as Kieran says, from Villa and Newcastle fans, etc. But actually, we are the prime example of doing it the right way, right? In terms of gradually building revenue through sort of investment in infrastructure over time. And if anything, we've suffered from that more than anyone, right? And Arsenal to some extent, right? Because Arsenal had that period post moving into the Emirates whereby, they were selling their best players because they were trying to pay off the Emirates debt. And so they've suffered. So I think for Tottenham and Arsenal, particularly, the narrative doesn't really feel fair around, the Big Six are trying to protect themselves and create this sort of separation, because we've gone through that pain. But Kieran's absolutely right. Obviously, City and Chelsea, wouldn't be able to do what they did now if timing was different. The problem is you only. It's hard, isn't it? Because we can't invent a time machine, right? So we can't go back in time and put these rules in place before Roman Abramovich took over Chelsea. So the argument is, well, you need to do something at some point, you would think. And unfortunately, where you fall in that period of history is going to impact you. So yeah, I don't think any of this stuff is going to have a massive impact for us. I think, to be honest, I think this is one of the things that Levy was banking on biting more than it did.
Right.
And how we would be able to he spoke about this a lot, right? About
Yep.
how when financial fair play really bites, Tottenham will massively benefit, etc., etc. Now the problem we have is you've got this odd paradox whereby the Premier League PSR rules, the penalties are very harsh, but actually to be subjected to the penalties, you have to be run by idiots or have done something really wrong. And we know that there's things like selling your women's team, selling assets in your own group to get around it, as Chelsea and Villa have done. But then with the UEFA rules, it's the complete opposite, whereby the rules are actually pretty well drafted and they're pretty good. But actually, for falling foul of them, you get a short-term fine, or you get time to get yourself back within the rules. And now Aston Villa, for example, they're going to be fine probably in a few years. Chelsea, though, because they've done it a few times and their situation is so extreme, they probably will end up getting a ban from European competition, I would guess, in the future. So yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how the regulator actually tries to enforce this stuff. As always with government intervention, we're always a bit skeptical how well it will work. I think it's quite interesting that the guy that has just been made chairman of the football regulator is not without controversy in that decision itself, which is not a great start given he was a Labour Party donor. So there's a potential conflict of interest point that's being raised around that.
Yep.
But for me, the one thing that massively needs to be fixed with football regulation, to be honest, is making sure that we have real proper tests around the lower league stuff, so we don't get situations like we're seeing at Sheffield Wednesday and Morecambe and everyone else, and that's the thing that really irks, doesn't it? I think there's obviously unfairness in the Premier League, but that sort of is capitalism, unfortunately, and I'm not sure you're going to solve that. But I think what we can hopefully solve is football clubs not being owned by people they shouldn't be owned by.
Do you see much changing, Kieran, I suppose, on that point, as we're looking for that close, with relation to this IFR coming in? How much is that really impacting the Premier League? What should maybe fans look out for? Should they be concerned? Should they be happy by this? What's your gauge? Is it for someone that's been around, like say, football finance for such a long time? What's your take on it?
Well, just for the sake of complete transparency,
yeah,
I presented to the fan-led review, and on the back of that, I got to know Tracy Crouch. Right. On the back of that, I was asked to write 2 research papers for the government as part of the investigation into where we stand as far as the finances of the game are concerned. I don't want an independent regulator. The only reason why we would need an independent regulator, if you've got a football association with no backbone and a Premier League which is incapable of negotiating on the wider, better interests of football with the EFL. Unfortunately, we got both of those. For me, the FA should be the regulator, but it's washed its hands. It's washed its hands. First of all, it says, we're interested in the England team and the and grassroots football, but you look at some of the things which take place in grassroots football, and I live in Sussex, as people be aware. Well, you might be aware that a young man sadly lost his life. Was it 3 weeks ago by crashing into a concrete stanchion at a football? Why is the Football Association allowing this? You're supposed to be in charge of the game. You're supposed to be protecting grassroots football. So I'm not a big fan of the FA. I'll be honest. The Premier League has had 4 years of opportunity to negotiate a distribution deal with the EFL, and every time it goes to the EFL, it offers it less money. And it's greed. I'll tell you off air where all the vanity and the greed is coming from, and perhaps that's not as big an issue as it used to be, but there's been a lack of common sense. The Premier League could have offered the EFL a little bit more of the pie, and the EFL would have said yes, and then the EFL would have fallen into line. We don't think we need a regulator. The FA is not bothered whether we have a regulator. The Premier League doesn't want a regulator. We don't get a regulator. But it's a failure of the FA. So it's a failure of the FA, and it's a failure of the Premier League to end up where we are. I take on board Conor's comments about David Cogan. David Cogan is independent. I don't know whether you've met him, Conor, but if you spent 5 minutes in his company, you would realise that he doesn't take any notice of any politician. He's also a Spurs fan.
Is he?
Can I reveal that?
It's intriguing. So, I mean, for you, Kieran, you think maybe not a great thing is coming into the game right now. Not a great thing.
I think we need it, but I think it's an indictment of the poor governance and the poor control that we've had from the so-called leaders of the game.
Okay. And I suppose on that point then, I mean, to get a gauge as to whether this has been successful or it's been worth the point of going through this, is that one of the things where you'll probably look here and, I don't know, 12, 24 months down the line to see, was this really worth it? Do you think that will be a gauge just to see then at that point whether it's been worth going through this and pursuing it from the FA's perspective?
I think we probably need longer time, because there is going to be another Morecambe, there is going to be another Sheffield Wednesday, there is going to be another Derby County, there is going to be another Reading, whatever it's going to be. I think the proof of the pudding will be when that happens, how does the independent regulator get involved? Can it solve these problems that much quicker than what we've seen in recent years? I think there's some really good things about the regulator. What happens if Spurs were sold to somebody for £5 billion, and then they say, we want to play all our matches in Dublin, or we want to play all of our matches in Miami, and we're going to fly Spurs across it. So that's almost impossible to achieve under the regulator. So there is protection of the stadium, there's protection of heritage, there's protection of badge. I think those are good things. The owners and directors test is going to be beefed up, which can only be good, because there's too many charlatans already in the game. If it makes it that much harder for them, they'll go off and do something else. So those are the positives. And finally, what the regulator will be able to do is to get Richard Masters and Rick Parry and say, you either agree a deal in the next 48 hours, stick them in a room, we'll give you a glass of water each. If you don't, you're not coming out until the deal's done. And if you don't, we will come in and we will tell you what the deal is. So I think that the Premier Leagues had no incentive to give more money away. Because what can the EFL do? The EFL can say, well, if you give us a bit more money, we'll reduce the semi-finals of the Carabao Cup to one leg, which is what it should be. That's the only thing. That's the only negotiating chip the EFL's got, and the Premier League doesn't care about it.
Right. Look, we've got a final question for Kieran, but before we do, Conor, I mean, just on that point of the overseas element, we're seeing this now. A lot of friendlies in overseas. Spurs played Arsenal, I think, for the first time overseas in the summer. There's also been that talk around having, the 39th game, essentially. What's your take on that, Conor? And should fans be in any more point concerned about this overseas nature being brought in? I think we respect the fact we know there's millions of Tottenham fans around the world that would love to see Tottenham play in their respective country. But do you have concerns with regards to this topic around overseas football or where it's going?
Massive concerns as someone who is a season ticket holder and someone, I think this all leans into, unfortunately, the trend in football where the fan is not cared about as much, because, to be honest, match going. We've had this discussion when we've spoken about ENIC before. The season ticket holders, if anything, are a nuisance, right? Because one, they don't spend as much money, because typically the season ticket itself is discounted, and then also, I couldn't tell you the last time I spent any money in the club shop, for example, and I drink in the pubs near the ground, so I don't even drink in the ground. Whereas you replace me with someone who wants to go for the day. They're going to likely spend a lot more money and make a lot less noise about the ownership, right? So, there is certainly that. Senior citizen concessions, we know there was the big thing with Save Our Seniors at Tottenham, and obviously this is not a Tottenham isolated issue. Lots of clubs have made a decision to reduce concessions for senior citizens. You look at our ticket prices compared to, say, in Germany, they're much, much higher. So there's loads of things like that, that have sort of been the preamble to this. I think with the games overseas, obviously we're seeing, I think it's La Liga and Serie A are both going to have a game overseas. I think for them, to be honest, it's because of how far they've fallen behind the Premier League in terms of revenue. I mean, you look at Tottenham's revenue compared to, massive giant clubs in Italy, for example, and ours dwarfs theirs now, the likes of AC Milan, and clubs of that stature. And so they're trying to think of ways that they can fill that gap, right, to get their teams competitive. Now, I think the danger for us as Tottenham fans or for Premier League fans is once they have done it, that starts to give the excuse perhaps for us to do it as Premier League, right? And they say, look, well, Serie A and La Liga have done it. We need to do it to continue to, and you can see how that argument then snowballs, right? So we've also got this situation now where we've got 12, 13 American owners in the Premier League.
Yeah.
Once that starts to get above that magic 14 number, and then again, Americans we know think about football in a different way to perhaps we do because of the way that their sports work, which is very different. So, no, sorry, that's a massive sweeping generalisation about Americans, but you get my point. American owners perhaps think a different way. So yeah, I think it's a danger. I think the European Super League point is still a danger. I think I know that's gone quiet, and Kieran will have a view on all of this as well. But it wouldn't shock me if in my lifetime we start to see these types of things because it's the way that money rules, unfortunately.
I mean, I suppose the biggest point I want to close it on, Kieran, is the Spurs fans that are looking at the future. After 24, 25 years under Daniel Levy, I'm just intrigued to you now. When you look at Tottenham in general now under this, like we've described, new era, the kids are taking the reign. The kids are in. The kids are in the building. What do you view? God,
I like the thought that the kids are older than me, and I'm 63. That makes me feel really good about myself. If I was a Spurs fan, I would be cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
Because the only logical reason for the Lewis family to stay involved with Spurs is if they're going to take the handbrake off. Because if they're not going to take the handbrake off, they might as well sell. Because Spurs are going to continue to have the 6th highest wages and continue to finish on average 5th and 6th in the Premier League. And you're going to continue to give them grief because you feel that doesn't represent your investment. So, trying to think of it from a strategy point of view, there's no benefit to them to maintain the status. If you're going to maintain the status quo, why not just go and keep Daniel there and use him as the lightning rod for all of the abuse, and they just sit and they just look after themselves. So that's the one real positive I think that Spurs can potentially take away from these recent changes.
Well, look, it's going to be intriguing, going to be fascinating. I think on our next catch-up, Kieran, we're going to know a lot more where Tottenham are, which again is an intriguing point of it. Look, we've had over nearly 7,500 that have been tuned in to us for this last hour and a bit, which has been an absolute pleasure having Kieran join us at a time where it's all change at Spurs. Kieran, for people that want to even have more change, if they haven't listened to you already, where can they find their weekly, or I think it's even sometimes daily, financial commute now, given how busy you are, and where can people find the wonderful work you do?
Yeah, if you want to take the dog for a long walk or go for a big session at the gym, I do a podcast with Crystal Palace fan and comedian Kevin Day called The Price of Football. And we look at everything. We look at everything from the Super League to the giant clubs such as Spurs and Liverpool and Manchester United and Manchester City and Chelsea. Those are all the big clubs in the Premier League. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've covered it.
All the way down. Last week we interviewed a guy who at the age of, this is going to make us all feel old and all feel a bit rather bitter, who at the age of 28 sold his agency for £350 million and bought Farnham Town Football Club. And it's one of the best interviews I've ever listened to and been involved with. He's got so many ideas, and it made me so proud that we've got young people coming through who want to do good things. So, yeah, we look at it from the very top. We do an awful lot of work on Sheffield Wednesday and Derby County and Reading and Wigan when these clubs go into crisis. And we do it, and we don't take ourselves very seriously. But we take football seriously because it's the love of our life.
And just so you can see how Kieran is as a person, that when you are coming onto the show, you can put a little description about anything you want, And in Kieran's description, he's got useful idiots. So just to give everybody an idea of the kind of man we've got on this show, despite how high a caliber he's been, and we've witnessed his growth in the last decade since I've started last one on Spurs.
It's all down to you, Rick. It's all down to you.
I'm not sure, Kieran, I can take credit for your global rise, but mate, it's been an absolute pleasure having you with us in the last decade to cover all things Tottenham. I'm sure you agree, Conor. This is obviously a great insight because we don't always get the time to kind of switch off a little bit from the football and have interviews like this, right? So it's a great time for fans just to get a gauge of what's going on, not just around Tottenham, but in football in general right now, because it is, as we're seeing already, Conor, it's a changing and ever-evolving game, right?
For sure. And yeah, look, Kieran is the OG of football finance, the Lionel Messi of football finance. So yeah, it's great to be on with you, Kieran. It's been really interesting. And yeah, it's definitely in an international break, I think there's no better topic than football finance, to keep us all going.
Absolutely. Well, look, we've engaged thousands out there. So I want to say a massive thank you again to the wonderful audience. Conor, thank you. Kieran, thank you. Keep keeping that wife happy. I've got a feeling it's only going to get busier in this next year or two. God help us all, right?
Well, when the 115 charges comes in, she's already got a suitcase packed and I've pre-booked a flight to Dubai.
I was going to say, was that with or without you for a second when you said she's got the suitcase?
Without me, definitely without me.
Listen, Kieran, you've been a star. Guys, girls out there, if you're not already following it, please make sure you're following, like I say, Kieran's wonderful podcast, Price of Football. It should be part of your daily, weekly, monthly, yearly commute, all in one, from myself, from Conor, from Kieran. We've been the last word on Spurs. The future could be bright from us all. Keep safe, keep well, and as always, come on you Spurs.